Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Game of Thrones episode review. This is for episode 4 of season 8, the final season of Game of Thrones. I'm sorry that this is up a few days later than I originally anticipated, but I've been dog watching for about a week now, so that's taken up a lot of my time. So I don't have much free time to shoot any videos or do anything like that. But I thought that before the week gets even further along that I would come in and jump in, at least attempt to do this. As you can see here, someone is preoccupied with something else, so who knows how long that's going to last. But yes, this is the fourth episode. It is titled The Last of the Starks, which is somewhat appropriate because it feels like a goodbye episode for some characters. Not necessarily the Starks. As we know, the Starks are pretty prominent right now, and we're not quite sure how much bigger role they're going to play because this was kind of their biggest accomplishment so far, was securing the North. But when it comes to the last of the Starks, there is a lot of things happening within the family, a lot of tumultuous things happening this episode within the Stark family. The biggest thing to happen in this episode is that Jon decides to tell both Arya and Sansa that he is not only their half brother, well, he is not actually their half brother at all. He is actually their cousin. And not only is he their cousin, he is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and he is actually the rightful king of Westeros and the Seven Kingdoms. Something that obviously a big shocker to them, but also, of course, they can't keep it to themselves, even though they swore to keep it to themselves. Well, at least Arya was able to. Sansa decided to tell Tyrion. Tyrion told Varys, and we don't know who Varys is going to tell or what he's going to ultimately do with this information, but you can see his wheels turning in his head and really trying to manipulate this information the best way he figures he can. But before we got to that, the beginning of this episode was basically everyone kind of celebrating and lamenting the dead from the Battle of Winterfell. And we got a big opening funeral pyre, and all kinds of stuff was happening. And it was a really, really interesting thing going on, very, traditional. And there was a really interesting speech said by John where he sounded very kingly, if you will, or he sounded very noble. And it was something that shows that he does have leadership qualities, even though he doesn't want to be a leader most of the time. That's one thing that bothers me about him is like he shows up to lead when he has to, but when someone says, "Hey, be our leader," he doesn't really want it. And through this celebration, a bunch of things happened. One, something that I don't think I predicted it, but I thought may have happened, maybe would have happened, and that is that Gendry would be made legitimate. He is now, Gendry Baratheon. He's no longer a bastard, although his um his given like last name for his region of bastards is not Rivers. That would be the Riverlands. He's from down south, which is a much different name. I don't know how they screw that up, but that's not the only thing they screwed up in this episode. Um, After Gendry, of course, got made legitimate, people are getting drunk, being festive, all that kind of stuff is happening, and one of the biggest flubs you'll ever see in a television or movie, especially one that is specifically set in a specific time period, or at least emulating a specific time period. There was a styrofoam coffee cup obviously left out on the table from craft services right next to Daenerys Targaryen during a really pivotal important scene that people are now remembering for that cup being there instead of what it actually means to the overall story. And it's very interesting because it came at a scene where Tormund Giantsbane is, in a drunken revelry way, is congratulating Jon Snow. He's telling him how great he is and how great of a leader he is and all this kind of stuff. And he's doing it so outwardly, so boastfully, and everyone's agreeing with him. And Daenerys is looking at them saying, why am I almost the look she's given is, why am I not getting this type of favor? Why am I not getting this type of praise? Since I am literally one of the ones who helped defeat, your enemy. She is really, really important. Bring your army, bring your dragons. Coming up to the north when she didn't really have to. She didn't have much stake up here other than being convinced by Jon and maybe perhaps understanding that she needs the North in order to, be a queen of a united kingdom. But she is missing kind of that up here, and you're seeing that divide show up more and more in this episode between loyalties and things like that. And it's really interesting how it's going to play out because it's becoming very fractured. And we saw it in this episode. We know right away that Sansa and Arya are loyal to Jon. They're skeptical of Daenerys. Sansa pretty much outwardly is. And we see, where the allegiances lie in this episode. Jon is definitely full in with Daenerys, and they have a great scene in this episode where you see the dynamic between them shifting and changing. It's this relationship that they have, and I use that loosely, I guess, because they know they're related now. And she seemingly doesn't have a problem with that, or at least she's trying not to think about that because she, I guess, does have some type of feelings for Jon. I don't know if it's reciprocated anymore from Jon's perspective. At least in this episode, he didn't seem that willing. He seemed to kind of push back and to have some realization of the realities of what's going on. And it really shows where things are heading for them. But he is still loyal to her. And she wanted him to not tell anyone about his lineage because she knows that it threatens her claim to the throne, and her claim to the throne is really what she wants. This is what she's wanted the entire series. So anything that's going to get in her way is something that she doesn't want. And it really should, even though he promises her that he doesn't want it, she still doesn't want him to tell anyone. She really wants to control the situation a lot more than I think she is, or the thing that she believes that she is, because she's starting to lose control of a lot of different things. Specifically in this episode, it definitely showed what she was losing control over right away. One of the opening shots in this episode is Jorah being, his dead body, and you see that he was a pretty big advisor to her when it came to a lot of important things about her growing pains as a monarch and just as a leader in general. And she's starting to lose people around her. We saw one of her biggest, personal losses in this episode is Missandei. Missandei, I'll get to that later, but she's no longer part of her kind of caravan of people or her posse or gang or whatever. She's losing a lot of loyalties, and we know that she lost a lot of her army during this fight that she really isn't being praised for at all. And you just gotta have to kind of see the desperation and the anger that's stirring in her. And we see that throughout this episode. And for really good reasons. I mean, she goes through a lot of personal turmoil. She loses another dragon in this episode, which is something that I just have to say I wasn't a big fan of. Not because dragons are these unbeatable forces that we're led to believe they are. They were extinct for so many years for a reason. They died out or whatever, and I just didn't like the way how abrupt it was. I didn't like that all of a sudden now they develop some magical harpoon or spear that can penetrate dragon scales, with one shot. Like a one shot kill. It's a very contrived writing tool that is just used to speed things along. And what we're seeing specifically in this episode is the only having 6 episodes, I think, is really hurting this season. I hadn't felt it up to this point, but I'm starting to feel it now because we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. We're getting down to the final episodes. There's only 2 left after this. And I'm feeling that things are sped up too fast. If this season had the typical 10 episodes in its entirety, or even something like 8 episodes, I would feel that there'd be more room to breathe right now, and things could really manifest more organically to the point where it doesn't feel so rushed. We're not rapidly moving through this world, too quickly to the point where things aren't having a full impact. That's why the Masande thing in this episode was really contrived, really, really contrived. Out of all of the things out of all of the people, it had to be Masande, which is kind of, ridiculous to a certain extent because we kind of knew that she was probably going to die at some point. I thought it would be better done, more well done. I thought it would be something that would have more impact. Also, she just happened to fall overboard or her boat get taken. It was specifically that one and not any of the other ones, and they knew specifically that Missandei was important to Daenerys. And it happened too fast, too rapidly, to the point where it doesn't have that full impact. And I really wish it did. And it doesn't help that this series doesn't have the best track record when it comes to minority characters. There's very, very few of them. And by very, very few, I mean, I think half of them just died in this episode. It doesn't, there's not a lot of diversity in these characters or in the world of Game of Thrones. And to get rid of one at this late stage of game isn't a great look from a PR perspective. Another thing in this episode that is getting kind of a lot of backlash, and something I do want to touch on, is the way in which they're handling the Sansa character, and specifically the way in which they've grown her character. The way in which they've done it is giving her a lot of traumatic events to go through. At the hands of Joffrey or at the hands of um, you know um, at the hands of Awan Rion's character for some reason. Oh, Ramsey, the character I can't remember, and just all of the things that she's gone through. The mental abuse that she received in King's Landing. Betraying her father, all this kind of stuff that she's gone through, but specifically the physical abuse by Ramsey has been utilized in a way that is utilized so many times in movies and television, and it's used as a way to strengthen the female character. It's almost as if they they're only using the trauma as a plot device to build the character, as opposed to just having her organically be strong or having her over time be strong. They're utilizing these traumatic events, and it's just cliched as hell. It really is. And I understand that in the world of Game of Thrones, it is a very misogynistic universe that they live in. It's a very, misogynistic, like I said, but very pro man. Women are abused physically, mentally, literally killed. They're treated like, second class citizens in the world of Game of Thrones. And I understand that a lot of these traumatic events are going to happen to female characters. I just, there's just a not a good look on the screen. It's just not a good PR thing for Game of Thrones to utilize their character like that. It's also, it's also, and I also understand that a lot of people in real life can empathize with the Sansa character. A lot of people have internalized their traumatic events that have happened in their lives to strengthen themselves and to become better people because of it. And it's a very much double edged sword, and it's very subjective based on who you are and what your personal views are and the personal events that you've gone through in your own life and how you've treated them. So it's a very dicey thing for the Sansa character specifically. It has strengthened her character, and it has made her have a very interesting arc in general, despite the problematic writing with it. And I think you know she's kind of a badass now, or at least mentally stronger. At least she understands the way in which the world works is a very dirty and divisive and frightening world to live in, and you've got to be constantly aware of that. What is also interesting in this episode, Arya had a big thing happen to her. She got proposed by Gendry, who I guess was feeling very much in the moment of just being legitimized and being made, uh, Lord of Storm's End and the head of the House Baratheon. It's and he you got to feel for the guy a little bit, but you also have to. He also must have been somewhat aware that Arya is not the typical a royal lady, typical noble lady. She's not going to be tied down to any one place. She's very much nomadic. She's very much a journeyman. She has this sense of adventure within her, and she's very much not archetypical, of what a woman should be in her, heightened position in society. And of course, in this episode, she continues her adventure with the Hound, where they're both going south. I'm pretty sure she's going to try to kill Cersei. That's one of her people on her list. The Hound is, of course, going to kill his brother, or at least die trying. Can't wait for that Clegane Bowl, which I'm not sure when that's going to happen. Maybe it'll be in the next episode or the final episode. But that's going to be very interesting. What else happened in this episode? Oh, an amazing scene between Varys and Tyrion. Varys and Tyrion Varys and Tyrion have a great scene together where they are pretty much deciding who should be king of the Seven Kingdoms, who should be the one to eventually be the one on the throne, because Varys is not sure anymore if Daenerys should be the right one on there. And it's a very interesting thing because Tyrion's trying so hard to stay loyal to Dany, but he must know that she has some problems when it comes to being a leader or making important decisions. She's very headstrong. She's very emotional. As we saw in this episode, she is very, very emotional, and she tends to lead with emotion. That can get you into a lot of trouble, and you make a lot of bad decisions because of it. And it's also something that is typical with Targaryen, specifically her grandfather, the Mad King Aerys, was one who basically went crazy and led with all emotion, and that's what ended up getting him killed. So they're kind of heading towards that Mad Queen type area, and I'm curious how far they're going to go down with it. Another thing is Cersei. We found out in this episode is obviously her plan is to, you know, she's not giving up. That whole scene between Tyrion going forth and trying to convince Cersei not to fight, I thought was completely nonsensical and really just lazy and just boring writing, to the point where we know at this point that Cersei is not going to give up her kingdom or her queenship or anything like that. And I know Tyrion must know that. He can't be this dumb to try to convince her once again. And it's interesting, he used almost the same argument he used before in last season to convince her not to fight. And obviously it didn't work. Missandei ended up getting killed. She kind of holds a lot of cards. She's in a fortified position. She is behind a battlement. She's behind walls. She's got the 20,000 people from the Golden Company. She's got ships. She has apparently a way now to kill the dragons, which is, like I said, completely contrived. This episode in and of itself is probably the weakest episode of the season so far. It's not. I don't think it's the worst episode of the series, but but back on track. A lot of people are saying it's one of the worst or the worst of the series. I don't think it is. I think it's definitely one of the weakest of this season, and it's definitely one that I saw the cracks in the series and the season, and I saw the problems that are in it. There's another thing that happened in this episode that is very divisive online, and that is the relationship between Brienne and Jaime took a different turn. It took a more romantic turn, which is something that had been vaguely hinted at throughout their character runs, but nothing as overt as this. It's like they jumped from like point A to point Z very, very quickly. And it's something that it's interesting for these characters because it moves them in interesting directions. For Brienne, it's the first time we've kind of ever seen her bring her guard down or ever be that emotionally vulnerable with anyone. We know that the only person that she's really loved, I guess, on a romantic type level was Renly Baratheon, and he was gay, so he wouldn't have reciprocated it at all, anyways. But Jaime was someone who has grown to really respect and love Brienne, and it's very interesting how they took that next step. And it's also controversial because the way in which their relationship kind of ended or diverged um, is basically he hears about what happened down south about them being about the ships being attacked, about dragon dying, and how furious this obviously made Daenerys. And what's interesting is he decides to ride south because initially he was going to stay and be with Brienne, and he decided to ride south instead. And in a way, he's falling back into his old ways, and I find it both interesting and sad at the same time because you want to see his arc continue forward. You wanted to see his arc continue to flourish and not revert back. You don't want to see these characters go backward, but sometimes when you're as complicated as these characters are, they can go back, and that's just part of their character's journey. And I thought it was a really powerful scene between the two where basically Jamie has a lot of demons, a lot of personal demons that we've seen crop up throughout the series. And it cropped up here specifically when he just goes through all the lists of the terrible things he's done. And he's done them all for Cersei, and how twisted and how dark they are, and how mentally they've messed him up. And Brienne is, pleading with him to stay. And a lot of people think that this betrays the Brienne character, or at least the Brienne character that we've come to know so far. It betrays her sense of stoicism and her sense of maturity, and her sense of being, different than other female characters tend to be. And I think you can make that argument. That argument is somewhat valid, but it also, I think, shows us a different aspect of her character that we're not used to seeing, and it's something that I found to be very interesting because where is she going to go from here? Where is she going to go? Is she going to ride south with him, or is she going to stay up north? Is this the last we've seen of Brienne, or are we going to see more of her? Also, characters that we had to say goodbye to in this episode. I might as well talk about that. Tormund Giantsbane, Sam, Gilly, Ghost as well, which freaking that bothered me too. And I know it bothered a lot of people. Oh man, I Ghost, the way they've treated Ghost over the last couple of seasons hasn't been the best. And I understand, the budget being what it is, they had to, divide it up to more important things, specifically the dragons. The dragons are, I guess, took precedent over anything else. And what is interesting is that um, they didn't even let John pet Ghost to say goodbye. And David Nutter, who directed the episode, he's directed many episodes of Game of Thrones, came out and said, "Oh, it was a CGI issue." Like a CGI issue? Did we not just see the Battle of Winterfell? A CGI issue? They're riding dragons in the sky, people. I mean, there shouldn't be a CGI issue. They had 2 years to make the season, basically, so there shouldn't be issues here. The only issue there should be is, why did we write this the way we wrote it? Yeah, but there's a great shot of all four of those characters: Gilly, Sam, Tormund, and Ghost, all in the frame of the entrance to Winterfell and saying goodbye to Jon as he goes south. And as we've learned, Starks who go south, bad things tend to happen to them. So we'll see where that goes. Uh, yeah, overall, not a great episode. The writing wasn't there. It was another episode that's kind of just setting the table up for the things to happen next. Um, but yeah, they really the show needed more time to, I think, really fulfill things a little bit more, and we're starting to see that. Overall, weakest episode of the season. Let me know what you guys think below. Also, if you like this video, please check out the other videos I have on my channel. There's only 2 episodes left, so I'll be doing episode reviews for those two, and then Game of Thrones will officially be over. So yeah, um, subscribe if you like as well. I always forget to say that. So until next time, see you later.